There's so many things that Laravel makes incredibly easy to implement when it comes to your applications, and one of those things that we're going to take a look at today is pagination. Pagination is an incredibly crucial element to any application, whether you have a social media site like X or LinkedIn, or you just have a blog. Most of the times you're going to be displaying a list of information and you don't want it to be incredibly long like this is right here. Usually you would implement some form of pagination, whether that's a scrolling kind of paginator where new items are added on the page as you scroll, or it's a simple pagination where it's just next and previous buttons, or somewhere in the middle where it's like a numbered paginator where you can jump to different pages. Because you don't want to display all of the information all at once, the paginator allows you to only display a certain number. And it's easier on the server because you're only displaying the first 10 and then the user starts to see the next 10 and the next 10 and the next 10. So how would you implement this within Laravel? Well, we're going to take a look at 3 different implementations across 3 different stacks. So we have the Livewire stack, we have the Blade stack, and then we have the Inertia stack with React. How do we implement pagination using the standards and resources that Laravel gives us, but in different front ends? Okay, let's start with the Blade pagination. And all of the front end styles are going to be relatively similar, if not identical, where I could make it. So we're basically looping through a list of users and then just showing that to the user, putting that on the page. If we were to take a look in our web routes, we're just passing the users as a user all into, in this case, the dashboard file, because the dashboard is just one Blade file. How do we implement this within Blade? It's really simple. Let's go to the documentation in Laravel. Here's how simple this is. Database pagination. We just have to make sure that Tailwind JIT is enabled by default because it uses Tailwind styles in order to show the paginator for both Laravel Blade and for Livewire. Since I used Laravel Breeze as the starter kit for this application, it's already enabled. That goes in our tailwind.config.js. And then we just paginate the items. You can do this with the database query builder, or you can just use the user paginate or the eloquent paginate results. So why don't we go ahead and do that in our web routes. Instead of user all, what we're going to say is user paginate, and we're going to say, why don't we say 10? All right, let's go to our view, refresh, and now we don't see a huge list. We only see 10. And well, how do we get the rest of them? Laravel gives you a styled view for a paginator using Tailwind CSS that we can just drop into our Blade file. Let's do that. So in our dashboard, maybe right here, we'll go ahead and we'll create a new div, maybe with a class of margin 6, and then we'll just say users, and then we just have to pass it the links parameter. And that's as simple as that. Look, there we go. We have our pagination right here out of the box. So we can see different pages that we can click on, or we can just click on like these next pages. And because this is Laravel Blade, it's a full page refresh. This is shown in the state up here. We have dashboard at the page of 13. All of this works like you would expect. Great. It's as simple as that. We could, if we wanted to, customize the pagination view with either passing it an additional view name or additional information, as well as just publishing the vendor file and changing it like that. But this is great for most things that you need out of the box, where you need just a simple paginator that you want to throw that in. That's what Laravel gives you. It's awesome. Now, one thing to know is we are using the paginate option, and there are other things like simple paginate as well as cursor paginate, and there's some trade-offs for both of those. Simple paginate is just going to be next in previous buttons, and that links would still give you that simple paginate for Blade views. We just have next and previous buttons. And you can see here that we have this page 29. We still have the ability to go to specific pages if we wanted to, but out of the box, that simple pagination would look very similar to this. Now, you can read the full documentation to see, okay, what are the main differences between cursor pagination and simple pagination. Put simply, cursor pagination is going to be a little bit more performant as compared to simple pagination or even the full paginate option. But unlike the offset-based pagination, the main paginate, it doesn't include page numbers in the query string. We can see here that the cursor-based pagination places a cursor string in the query string, and that cursor is an encoded string containing the location that the next paginated query should start paginating and the direction that it should paginate. So this is great for extremely large data sets that you don't necessarily need page numbers for. You can see here that if we implement that cursor paginate in our query, that we're grabbing all the users and passing it to the view, the links still work in the sense that we still have those styled links out of the box, but you can see here that it's just a query string. There's no page number in the query string itself, but it is a little bit more performant in that aspect for large data sets than something like a simple pagination or even the page offset pagination. Now, when it comes to implementing this within Livewire, the functionality, at least from this side of things, is relatively the same, but there are a couple additional features. Livewire has a with pagination trait, or within Volt, it's this uses pagination function that gives you some extra features, some extra perks within Livewire to use pagination. You can see here this use with pagination that gives you some additional options. So if we implemented this now, when we're passing in this users to our view, we can say user all, we'll just say user paginate, and we can say paginate 10, and then we'll do the same thing down here. Div class M4, and we can say users links. Let's take a look. And yep, everything works good. You can see here it flashes to the top. Well, we're not doing a full page refresh. This is still just one component that Livewire is doing all of the necessary magic behind the scenes to push new information to the page. So can we make this better than it was in the blade component? And the answer is yes. That's why we have that use pagination or uses pagination with pagination trait. We can use this scroll behavior. We can say the data we want scroll to is false, or you can scroll to a specific element on the page. So why don't we do this, data scroll to false, and we'll go back. Now we have the ability to just stay where it is when we change pages within Livewire. 1,500 results that we can just go back and forth to. And Livewire does have some additional functionality within the pagination options, like resetting the page or doing some more custom things like going to specific pages within Livewire. And of course, you can also customize the views as well for those pagination links. So whether it's simple pagination, offset pagination, or even cursor pagination, it's still relatively the same between Blade and Livewire. Livewire, you just get some additional functionality. Last but not least, let's look at inertia, specifically inertia with React. Now, one of the things that I like to do personally whenever I'm using inertia is use API resource to pass information to my inertia front end, to my inertia views. In this case, the user resource that we can see right here, which just allows you to only pass the information to the front end that you actually want to be displayed. In this case, if we add additional information in the user, like stripe links or any sensitive information, I don't have to pass that to the view unless I specifically tell it to. And so that's what this API resource is for. You can check out the Eloquent API resource docs if you want additional information on what that looks like, as well as how to use it in any application. So since we're passing the user resource collection, the user all query within Eloquent, why don't we try to display pagination within Inertia? Inertia is going to be a little bit of a different beast when it comes to pagination, because whether you're using Svelte or React or Vue, you get that data passed into pagination with Laravel. So how do we make this work within React? Well, passing paginate to the front end, in this case, we're passing the users variable to the React user list component. So we have this users.data.map where we have all that information here. And that's shown on our dashboard like this. So user list, we're grabbing the props of users, passing it to that user list component. This is specific to React, but a lot of this functionality will be similar in Vue or Svelte within Inertia. Well, what do we get when we pass pagination instead? And how can we use that? So if we paginate maybe 10 items, let's take a look. Not pagination, it is paginate. Oops. And now let's open up the DevTools, and I have React DevTools installed. So if we go to components, we have the ability to look at the information being passed to this dashboard component, because that's the main component on our React Inertia dashboard. We have the user's prop, as well as auth and other stuff we're passing to the component, but there's this new meta prop where we can say current page, we have from, last page, links, path, per page to total. So all of this is the information that we then can use. Since we're passing this to our front end within Inertia, we can create a component that utilizes this. I've already done that, so why don't we take a look? Here's a simple pagination component. It's not going to look identical to the ones that we used in Blade or Livewire, but it's really similar, based on the pagination.links.map, where we're mapping through all of the information. We have the key as well as the link URL that we have in that meta tag that we saw in the DevTools to say, okay, when that link is actually active, let's gray that out. It's not clickable. Same thing for when it is available to be clicked. And then we're setting the HTML for that link label. So we're basically just using the information that we have here, but in a component itself. So now here in our user list, we'll implement this pagination component. So we can say here, maybe if there is a users.meta, and that was the element that we saw in the component view in our React DevTools, if that meta attribute exists within users, then we'll go ahead and show the pagination option. We'll pass that users.meta into there, because like we saw here, we're just using the meta.links that we're mapping over. So this pagination could be meta as well if we wanted to make it a little bit easier to read, but this makes sense in my mind. We have the pagination of users.meta, and then in this pagination component, we're mapping over all of that data. So I want to take a look at how this looks. And yeah, everything looks good to go. So you have a little bit more natural control because you're getting all of this information within the React component or Vue component on your front end that's being passed there by Inertia. The homepage at Laravel.com says it best. Laravel has laid the foundation, allowing you to freely create without sweating the small stuff, of pagination. Not having to worry about, okay, how am I going to set up all of this to make sure I'm looping through the correct data and then displaying only that correct data on the page while not, resetting things if I need to go to a specific different page, or if I have specific query filters that are passing and parsing that information. It starts with Eloquent. It starts with eloquently displaying that information, eloquently passing that information to the front end. So whether you're using Blade, Livewire, or Inertia, it's all simple. It's all easy. Pagination made easy.